This segment has been sponsored by Pro Bikes Caribe. Pro Bikes Caribe, get yours today. Before we get into today's interview, hear a little bit about the book from the author themselves.
I'm Salese Haynes, and I'm the author of Success If I Made It, Here's How, which is a self-help slash self-development book that I wrote for young and young at heart female entrepreneurs. The book is notes from my journal on my path to finding my own version of success, and it can be found on Amazon or through me.
Greetings, listenership. Welcome to TLC, Tropical Literature Creatives, the podcast where we interview authors of Caribbean heritage about themselves and about their literary works. Today we have with us the sensational Mrs. Salese Haynes Rumani. Salese is the author of the book Success. If I Made It, Here's How. So, without further ado, I introduce you all to Ms. Haynes. Ms. Haynes, welcome to Tropical Literature Creatives.
Hi, Kevin. Hello, TLC listenership. Thank you for having me, and I'm glad to be here to be able to share.
Okay, thank you very much for agreeing to be interviewed, ma'am.
Yes, of course, certainly. I was quite excited when you reached out because it has been on my list of things to do, my very long list of things to do to get back into the spin of promoting this book that I wrote. And so I was glad when I got the invitation when you reached out.
I, I'm hearing you talk and I'm thinking it's true to form the details that I read about your book. When you talk about the spin of things, the book introduces you as an entrepreneur, an in-demand motivational speaker, attorney at law, and author. So you just get the impression that there's
That's
always
yeah,
something
a
happening.
lot of things. Oh yeah, definitely. In this world, it never goes quiet.
No, and we see that with your book and also with the things that are happening with you. But before we go anywhere, can you share with us which Caribbean island do you share affiliation with?
I was born and raised in Trinidad and Tobago. I moved to London when I was 18 and I spent 7 years living there and then came back to Trinidad. Trinidad, we don't always have the best relationship, Trinidad and Tobago and I, but especially when I travel the world, I am a Trini girl to the bone. It's there in my heart, on my sleeve.
Okay. When it isn't that you've been traveling and you encounter persons from outside of Trinidad and Tobago, do you recommend that they try anything if it is that they ever visit Trinidad and Tobago?
Definitely. So I would say most of all, come for Carnival. Carnival is it. Carnival is what makes me fall in love with Trinidad and Tobago. When you're here for Carnival, definitely take a flight or a boat across to the Sister Isle. Our beautiful beaches in Tobago make the experience worth it. And trying some of our local cuisine, doubles is a must try. It's the only street food that I like, even though very ironically, in my first 18 years when I lived in Trinidad and Tobago, I had never had doubles. I had doubles for the first time in London. It sounds crazy, but it's 100% true.
No, I mean, when I heard that, I just felt like, the parent, that says, okay, all the time I'm cooking here and you're not eating.
Yeah, there's food at home. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you very much for those details. Can you tell us a little bit about your pink print, about the book that you would have written, Success? If you made it, here's how. Just a little bit, not too much, because you want us to go out and buy the book.
Yeah, absolutely. So the craziest thing about this book is that I'm a big believer in vision boarding. And so in 2021, it was on my vision board, write a book. And then we were in December 2021, and I was like, oh, I don't have a book. But what I did have were a lot of journals. I do a lot of journaling and writing about my like how I feel through my business journey in my personal life, it's career, it's family, all of those other things. And so I had all of these stacks of journals, some digital, some print. And I was like, okay, you know what? This is going to be the book, right? And so December 2021 was a pretty crazy month. And yet in my head, I was still going to do this. So I had a trip planned. I was going to Cuba And and my intention was to finish the book before I went to Cuba, but that didn't happen. So I was there in Cuba in the nighttime, typing away furiously. And this book was actually completed in 9 days from the time I left to Trinidad and my holiday in Cuba. So it's a little bit of a miracle in and of itself, because like if I give you the full details, my computer crashed during that time. And
Goodness.
at one point, yeah, it was a lot of dramatic things happening. But it just goes to like the power of motivation, and like when you put your priority on a particular task, like that's what it was for me. And that's why I was so happy to have made it and just bring it to life, because it really sells me on the power of determination. And I think that's a thread in the book. And then that is the book itself, really and truly. So this book, I've divided it into 3 parts, and it kind of talks about like my journey from well, formative and childhood years, and how I decided the things that I wanted in my life and how to shape my life, the tools that I use. So as I mentioned, I'm big on vision boarding, writing things down, making plans for action, for goal setting and goal tracking. And a lot of those tools and tips are in the book itself, but it's also a narrative format. I call it the pink print, because when I feel like I need that spark of motivation, that's my go-to. It was like a letter to myself, but with all the other business lessons and aspects added into it as well. And yeah, like I always got a lot of inquiries on social media, like how do you do this? How do you keep it together? How do you balance being a mom, being a writer, being a attorney, all of those things. And that's what I put into the book, like my how, but also the why behind it as well. So I go back to it from time to time, even now, and it's been a very, very invaluable tool for me, and I hope it has been for the persons who purchased it and read it as well.
I mean, that has been an encouraging introduction to the book, and that just gives me a whole bunch of questions to ask. Uh,
I can imagine.
no, seriously, seriously. I mean, first off, 9 days, 9 days.
9 days, yeah. 9 days while on vacation in Cuba with crappy internet in the hotel room, a computer crash in the middle of that. It was intense. I probably wasn't the nicest person to be around in that time.
No, one can imagine. One can imagine. One of the things that you mentioned is that you were very seriously into journaling. Would you say that that assisted you in putting the book together? Because I'm thinking that because you have a habit of journaling, that, ordering your thoughts, that writing and everything, it comes together. Is that the case?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And some of the material from the journals is the book as well. So while I would have added context and kind of shaped things to change the perspective from me, just blabbing and putting my thoughts down on paper with only myself thinking that I'd read it, I had to change the perspective a bit. But and because of the tight deadline, a lot of the material that is in the book came from my previous journals.
Ah, okay. I mean that it's really good to see that that all the efforts that you'd have been, well, I'm not too going to I don't want to say effort, but the habit that you'd have developed over time, that they would have had returns to you at this future date. So I think I'll make mental note of that as well. I mean, I haven't read the book as yet, but as I'm talking with you, I'm getting like little gems and jewels. So I'm making notes for myself as I go along.
Yes, certainly.
In addition to journaling, what other skills would you say would have come in handy for you putting this book together? Me, one of the things I observed is that this book is self-published.
Yes. Well, I am they say necessity is the mother of invention. So I'm the queen of figuring things out. If there's a problem, we need to figure out a range of solutions, and then we'll decide which is the best one. So as I said, I had this tight deadline, and also too, I didn't have the time and capacity when I was looking at doing the publish. And I mean, my deadline was all self-made. So these pressures that were coming were from me, and I completely accept and own that. But it was a lot of pressure, and I was like, how am I going to make this happen? Because I want to be accountable to myself and the things that I said I'm going to do. You know, when I say I want to do something, I'm going to do it. And it just led to a natural progression and path of, okay, you need to figure things out. And to be very fair and transparent to, a lot of it was just outsourcing material, outsourcing the things that I needed. I've never published a book before. I've been published before, but of course I've never published a book before. This was the first time I was doing something like this, and it was learning on the fly. It was I did a course, a mini course. I looked at resources that I could have tapped into both locally and internationally. I looked at outsourcing, and most of the book is outsourced. I would have loved to use local people, Caribbean persons, for the things that I needed, like doing proofreading, formatting, but I didn't have the time. So using sites where you could find talent, and I always believe in doing due diligence. So, you know, if I needed something done, I would go and look at the person's background, look at their portfolio, and then make a choice, you know? And that was how I got all of the resources that I needed for cover. The cover shoot was done locally, but the editing and putting it together, every single thing otherwise was outsourced.
Again,
And
Continue. No, continue.
yeah, and done and supervised by a team of one.
No, I mean, I'm thinking that on one hand it's like a one-woman show, but also what I'm thinking is that there's a lot of coordination happening. So I don't know, is this something that you I don't know how I'm just not sure how to articulate this question, ma'am, because I'm just I'm just no, I'm genuinely impressed at your resourcefulness as to how it is that you were able to identify the things that you need, how it is that you have been decisive in that you were able to
Mhm.
identify the things, identify the criteria, and make decisions. And I'm thinking that, these decisions didn't take you like weeks or months, that you just said, okay,
No,
X, Y, Z, A, B, C. Does it have X, Y, Z? No, this one is out. This one has X, Y, Z, A, B, C. Is it pink?
yeah,
No.
because
But
Salese
I'll go with
said that she was going to publish a book in 2021, so Salese had to answer to herself.
it. No, and the fact that you have been accountable, I think that is personally encouraging to me.
Yeah, and I wouldn't sugarcoat it. As I said earlier, it was pretty intense. Like this was my only focus for about 20 days, and it uh, it took a lot out of me. Just as I said before, like I'm not blaming anybody else because this was me versus me, very literally.
Yes.
But when I look at it and the fact that it was done, it happened, that it's a testament to, you know, the power of the mind, really, what you can do when you put your mind to doing something.
Yeah, I mean, this book is your work, and I'm looking at the effort that you have put into it. I'm curious about two aspects of this book. One, were there any other persons who would have contributed towards the putting together of this book? Maybe was it an editor or anyone like that? That's my first question. And the second question is, how was the reception of your work in this particular project from your family? Because I imagine this is something that you were heavily invested in. Like you said, it wasn't a pleasant process. And they would have had to
Yeah.
look around. They probably had to tiptoe. They probably had to just go and check and see if the coast was clear. They probably just leave by the door and just leave without saying anything because they know at anything, stuff could pop off. And tell me
Oh,
about
yeah.
those things.
So, as I mentioned, I did have an editor, and it was somebody who was outsourced from a third-party platform. Even with that, like and this is part of the reason why I'm both filled with pride and also a little bit not I wouldn't use the word annoyed, but sometimes I think, you know, you could have done better, and that's the reality. Like even in the book there are a couple of typos, for instance, and like if I was operating in my normal mode, like this would have never seen the light of day until. But then it goes back to that overwhelming. The overwhelming thought is like, okay, look, you did it. You did it afraid. You did it frustrated. You did it. Thinking of all, not thinking of all the what ifs. What if somebody judges you because you said then and you meant they? All of those things, and so that's why there are mixed feelings. But the number one thing that inspires me and motivates me about the book is that it got done. And in all of those different circumstances, I did have well, I call her my business bestie, Avalon Gomez. She would have done the forward for the book. And apart from that, persons would have contributed in terms of life experiences, tangentially, but generally it's me, my words, my material, my notes and letters to myself over the years, pretty much. And then the second question that you asked was in terms of family reception. I think that everybody was kind of glad when it was done, including myself. You know, it definitely was a difficult period, and there was a lot of kind of figuring out like how do you, because when you're writing, and that's why it's always easier to write fiction versus nonfiction. You always have to think about when you're writing about people that you love, how are they going to receive it? Do they want to be seen in this light? And so I had some of those conversations with myself and with like family members. And that was a little bit difficult too, because you want to be true, but then your truth isn't their truth, you know? So that part of the process was touchy. And yeah, so I think everybody was pretty much excited when it was done and closed, and it was like, okay, this is here, we'll figure things out otherwise. But mostly my family was very proud, and they were very supportive, even with doing the launch. So we'd have published, and then we had the launch. The anniversary is coming up soon. It was on January the 21st, 2022. And yeah, it was well attended, even though it was, still in that COVID period, and it was good reception. What I was surprised about was that a lot of men were interested in the book, because my platform is about female empowerment and women, and the book really is written as a letter to, my girlfriends, my thoughts to my girlfriends. And men were interested. And one of the guys that bought it, he recommended it as one of the top 5 books that he had read that year. And I was amazed. I was bowled over, really.
No, and that is encouraging to hear. And to be honest, I can understand it. I haven't read the book, but I've read details about it, and what I've read, it has been encouraging. It does sound like a tool that persons can go to just, have, bearing. And if it is that, any of those 7 success secrets that you've listed, can help, me as well. I think that regardless of
Of
your gender,
course.
whether male or female,
Yeah,
I think I would just take the advice
get
where,
something from it. Yes. Yeah.
uh, as we're talking about taking advice, how would you feel? What would your thoughts be if it is that your book, your literature, were to be adopted by an organization? Let's go as far as say a secondary school to help
Mm.
persons, in terms of their planning, in terms of going forward with their lives. How would you feel about your book being adopted for something like that?
I would love that, because thinking about myself in those days,
Hmm.
um, studies in maybe secondary school, I wasn't the I wouldn't even describe myself as shy, because if provoked, I'd be the loudest person there. But I didn't volunteer, I wasn't the person who was at the forefront, and I was just kind of in the background, just doing my own thing, really. And I think a lot of the stories that I've shared in the book, only when I was writing them down, I was like, wow, this happened. So I can give you like a example of one of the things. So when I was about 7 years old or so, um, you know, growing up, you think, what am I going to be when I grow up? And I had written down that I wanted to be an attorney and a judge, and then a judge, and my grandmom saved that. And after that, I actually wanted to be a doctor. I forgot that I had said that I wanted to be an attorney. And one of the other things that I had said was that I wanted to work for PwC, which of course is the accounting conglomerate.
Mhm.
And later on, 10 years later, at 17, I would have never remembered those things if, my grandmom didn't still have the piece of paper to show me. And even 10 years after that, at 27, I forgot about those things again, right? But life is just so strange and funny because when I left the corporate world and I was working for myself, there was an opportunity at an oil and gas company for me to do some maternity cover, but they weren't hiring directly. So I was actually hired by PwC. And like none of this connected until, as I said, until I was writing the book. And I was like, at 7, I said I wanted to work for PwC, and I did, you know? So it was just such a crazy moment to think that those things that I had written maybe 20, 25 years ago had happened and were happening. And it was like, did I subconsciously, well, I don't know if it would make, but did the subconscious kind of influence it, or was it coincidence? Or I still haven't figured out that part yet, but sometimes I like to think, there are no coincidences. It is that you have a role in shaping your own reality.
And I guess you could look back at the journals for yourself and see.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Because as I said, like you have ideas, you have things that you want, but you forget about them because then it's like it's whatever is in front of you. You're busy dealing with that. And looking back and having the opportunity to reflect, and that's one of the things that I always do at the end of a year. That's when it hits, that's when the dots connect. And it was like that encourages me to continue planning for future.
One of the things that I've learned about authors, and I'm assuming that this is the situation with you, that the investment that you've made in terms of being involved in your book in almost every juncture, that you'd have had to be involved in the sales and the marketing aspect of it. So you'd have had to be
Yeah.
out there promoting the book in different forms and fashions. Um,
Yes.
as the book launch did take place and you look back on it right now, can you think of anything that you might have A, done differently, or B, that you could have improved on where promoting your book was concerned?
For the launch of it, I would say in terms of things that were done differently, I just didn't give myself enough time. I didn't allocate myself enough resources. So for the launch, we did outsource that. We had, and this is another fun story because the venue that I had that I wanted to promote the book launch at, that was the same venue that I had done my first vision board. And that was when I started, like that to me, that's almost like where the book first took seed. And it was ironic because the venue was closing the next month. So when I reached out to them, they were like, we could do this if you do it before the end of January. And I was like, listen, I am on board, let's get it done. So I didn't give myself enough time, but for good reason. Because it was important for me to be there in that exact spot. So that's one thing I would say, a little bit more time, grace, resources would have been great. In any case, it always would be great. And then just in terms of like being open to criticism and feedback, because when you produce something, it's almost like a part of you. I think you kind of hinted at that earlier. So it's not, and I know art because I have a few artists that are clients and they're just so sensitive. And then I saw it in myself with the book. Like there's no objectivity. It's almost like somebody is criticizing your baby, you know? So those were some of the things I would say I would learn from and try to incorporate or do differently.
Okay. You had mentioned two things that stood out to me personally. You mentioned first off that, when it is that you do a piece of work, it's like part of yourself. Um,
Yes.
there was a time when I was actually searching for a name for the podcast, and I came across, I think the word is Meraki, I think it is, or it is that,
Mm.
yeah, you come across it before?
There's a business that I know that's Meraki. It's a local business, and they make it's like sort of African print journals.
Hmm.
I don't know if you're familiar with them. I don't know what the meaning of the word is, but I know that that business, they're very into like authentic, original, one of a kind pieces.
Well, the meaning of the word doesn't really lean towards that, but at the same time, it kind of does. But the definition of the word, or if I could just paraphrase, is to put something of yourself into your work.
Hmm.
So it's
Okay. Yeah, the original. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so it's something very personal. And as you talk about your work and you talk about, when someone criticizes, you feel it, in your chest, as if, it's
The
happening.
whole chest. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you feel it, you take it personally because it's hard to separate yourself from the work, and more so for you because a lot of your work is depicted from your journals, which comes from yourself. So it's kind of hard to separate yourself from your work. So I could hear where you're coming from, where, yeah, it feels personal, even though it isn't intended as such. It feels personal.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, like in my main role as an attorney, as I mentioned, I have clients who are artists, and one of them in particular, and even though only one person has expressed it, like I see the same attitude in others, and so one of them would have said to me, like, how do I charge for my work? Like, how can I say this is $10,000, or how can I say it's $500? It's just is what I do. I want to make people happy. I want to make people smile when they see it. I want to make them feel something. How can I charge for that? So when she first came to me, she was like basically pricing out her raw materials or whatever she used, and would sell her work at that amount. And I was like, no, you're crazy. Like this is not working. You're gonna be poor forever. And having that experience with her, and like because it was the same sort of thing that she said, like this is like my baby, like how do I charge somebody for this, and then they tell me, okay, well, $5,000 is too much, like that. In a literal sense, it's almost like they're shutting you down completely as a person. So I didn't understand it when she said it until I had this experience of writing and doing the book and feeling that, not probably not as intense, but certainly a level of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting how it is that you have the conversations with persons and it helps bring clarity to yourself as well.
Yeah, and probably not always at the same time, but you can look back and reflect and see how it added to the fabric of your life.
Yeah. And I think you have better sight than a lot of persons because you could always go back to those journals.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. And see the whole path, really. The only part that I don't know is the future, but none of us do, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, do you see yourself mentoring or giving advice to persons going forward, or is it something that you do at present?
I do, and I should probably say did. So a lot of what I would have done, like pre-COVID and maybe even during COVID in a virtual sense, was I try to dedicate time that I have to giving back and sharing. So I did quite a few mentoring programs. But then I got a little bit busy, so I don't do as much work. I had a mentee both in law and in business. I haven't checked it. This is very naughty. I know I haven't checked in with them in some time. But when you see your blind spots and you recognize them, then there's always the opportunity to do better.
Well said. Well said. Um, but one thing I wanted to ask your opinion about in particular, I try to ask this of all of the authors. In the Caribbean, one of the areas that we identify that persons we can improve in and we can improve on is the kind of reading that we do, or the volume of reading that we do, or young person
Yes.
in particular. And we bring it up because we realize that the attention span of persons young and old, isn't where it should be. Can you
Mm-hmm.
can you think of any advice that you would give to persons, let's say parents who have children in particular, that you can give to them to encourage their children to read more?
Make reading fun rather than a chore. So, for instance, in my home, my husband and I, one of the things that we decided to do was have family reading time, but not make it into a thing. So just things like dedicate some time to both of us reading as adults, and then encouraging our daughter, to also get a book and come join in the reading time, and just have this half an hour where everybody sits and reads, because what we realized is that outside of that, everybody would just be doing something else on their own device. I'd be on my phone, he'd be on his phone, she'd be on her iPad. And nobody's talking to each other, nobody's reading anything that stimulates it's silly videos on TikTok or whatever else, looking at memes on Facebook. And that's fine too, to kill some time, but it's how much of it enriches your brain. And what I realized with my daughter was that when she read more when she was younger, her vocabulary was so extensive. Like, anybody who met her would be impressed that, at 3, 4, she knew those words, versus now where she's a little bit more lazy and she has her own mind. So that if you tell her to do something, she would quite in a very firm way say, no, I'm not doing that. And so it isn't as easy to get her to do the things I want her to do. And I realized that her growth level slipped off. So that's why I'm kind of putting these things back in place to stem that, to get her to tap into that creativity that I saw and still see when she reads. It's always interesting for me when she creates these stories, and I realize the more she reads, the more and the better, or the more involved stories she creates. So I put it as my focus to get her to that point.
Okay, I mean, good advice from the perspective of an author and also from the perspective of a mother.
Yeah, because it isn't easy to deal with them. She's 6 now, and boy, everything is what she wants. She's a real little mini tyrant, but we help them, and we try to steer them as much as we can into what we think is right.
Uh, One of the things I observe about you is that you're always active, is that you're always doing something, from writing books, from you mentioned being mentors to a person in law, as well as to being a mentor to a person in business. 2024 has
Yes.
just 2024 has just started. What can we expect to hear from Mrs. Salese Haynes Rumani in 2024?
In 2023, I did a lot of travel, and that was both intentional, and I needed that. I needed that escape. In 2024, I want to focus on expanding my core business, which is my legal business at Titan Chambers, and also focus on looking at opportunities internationally. So I want to tighten processes at my core business so that they can run even if or when I'm not here. And that's with the intention of making a move abroad, whether that is permanent or temporary or in somewhere in between. But that's where I want to be.
Okay, okay. Your book, Success. If I Made It, Here's How. Where can persons get a copy if it is that they want one?
So the book is available on Amazon. Everybody has Amazon these days, I think. And I also have a couple copies that are available locally as well. So if anybody is interested, they can send me a message on Instagram. My Instagram page is at lawyergirl868. And also just feel free to reach out and say hi, say that you've listened to the podcast. Let me know if there was anything that stood out or resonated with you as well. I'm quite open to receiving feedback.
Okay, excellent. And feedback, in addition to reviews, they really help with the sales. So If it is that you read the book, I mean, what I recommend and I endorse is that you leave a review for the author.
Absolutely. I would appreciate that.
Okay. All right. That brings us to the end of our interview. Thank you very much for agreeing to be interviewed, Miss Haynes. It was a pleasure.
I appreciate it on your end as well. Thank you for sharing my journey and my story with your audience.
Okay, by all means. And I think that's just how it is with authors. Once persons document their journey, I think that everybody could learn and everyone can have a takeaway from it.
Yeah, I like to think of it as a one-step theory. You may not know everything, you may not know how to do everything, be everything, but if you're one step ahead in some way, there's a lesson that you can share.
Indeed. And agreed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Take care.
Okay, you as well. You've been listening to TLC, Tropical Literature Creators. If you've heard something of interest or something you like, reach out to us. Reach out to our authors. Follow us on social media. We look forward to hearing from you.